Hello, everybody. This is Pascal from Neutrality Studies, and today I'm talking again to Evarist Bartolo, a former Foreign Minister of Malta. Evarist recently wrote an article about the Mirage of the common home and about how the United States has always opposed a pan-European security structure. This and the current behavior of the United States on the world stage is what we want to discuss today. So, Evarist, welcome back.
Thank you, and thank you for this invitation.
Well, thank you very much for giving us again your insights, because I think, you've actually observed and worked in this European and Euro-Atlantic foreign policy game for quite a while. Can you maybe tell us your insights about, just how it is and why it is that although we had the 1990s with this idea of now peace dividend, and now we're going to have a big European up to Vladivostok, a common home for everybody, and that we never achieved it?
Well, for a small country like Malta, it's the smallest state in the European Union and one of the smallest states in the world. You can imagine how, for us, cooperative security is not an ideological abstraction or discussion. It is something that small states, medium states need. But then we find out that all the countries need it, whatever their size, whatever their power. And the dream that we had, going back to the Gorbachev era, and when he used to talk about let's build a common security home, because that is the only way that different regions. I think the idea applies not only for Europe, but also for other regions. And then I remember when Gorbachev came to Malta in December '89 to meet Bush, there was already the hope that finally the divisions in Europe would start healing, and we would go along with the concept that he described as let's build a common security home, as you said, from Portugal to the Soviet Union, so that my security does not threaten your security. And let's try to build on the pillars of the economy, on the pillars of diplomacy, culture, and politics. And unfortunately, that did not happen. That did not happen, and I spent some time analyzing the classified documents, both from Moscow and from Washington, and you can tell that there was no belief from the side of the US that the Organization for the Security and Cooperation in Europe should be the dominant security architecture for Europe. For the US, it was very clear, though they did not say it loudly all the time. They did say it in bilateral meetings, which were still sort of confidential, which now have come to light because of the classified documents, where for them, number one was NATO. Number two was the European Union, as long as it was within the framework of NATO, not a European Union which would have strategic autonomy. Kissinger, way back in the 70s, used to say, we do not want Europe to grow into a giant. It must remain divided dwarfs, so that the dwarfs will fight against each other. But at the same time, contained within a framework which was number two, as I said, the number two policy of the US in Europe was the European Union. Number three, as a very poor relative, came OSCE. And I can just mention some particular moments which really struck me going through these documents. When Bush invites Helmut Kohl to a discussion at Camp David, and he tells him, don't bring Hans-Dietrich Genscher with you, because Hans-Dietrich Genscher was one of the few voices that was still saying we must have a common security architecture for Europe. We must build on the CSC, which this year we should have been celebrating now, the 50 years of such an important historical moment, but instead it was weakened. And right from the very beginning, once they analyzed the fact that Russia, for them, then they started talking of Russia, was defeated, let's not take seriously what their concerns or what they say. After all, they are too weak to impose their will. And at that moment, when the world then from a bipolar world became a unipolar world, the at no point was there an awareness. Listen, are we sure that at this moment of ultimate dominance, this is going to last forever? Now that we are very strong, we are in a position to dictate to everyone what they should do. And they tried to dictate also to the Soviet Union, starting with Gorbachev in his face, telling him, "You're so nice, these ideas are so good," but then doing the opposite. The same with Yeltsin. You read the letters that he used to send to Clinton, for example, uh, pleading, pleading. You are making me humiliate Russia. This is impossible. If you're going to keep on growing NATO towards our territories, this is going to be a big problem for me. How am I going to sell it sort of to my country? Because they feel that and from the United States side, when they talk among themselves, and we see it in these documents, they say, listen. Ultimately, we're talking with a defeated power. So they have to accept what we do. And then summit after summit after summit, though even from the United States, you have diplomats, even within the State Department, saying, listen, if this is going to continue growing, the Russian Federation is seeing it as a threat. And then especially when it comes to Ukraine. Ukraine was the ultimate red line that would not be allowed to be crossed. And they were aware of it from before, but still believed that they were in a position to impose their will. Obviously, by the time that 2013, 2014 was coming along, by then, Russia had started reviving economically and militarily, and did not want to be dominated and dictated to, as in the period between 1989 and 2014. Though Putin kept there's the famous now Munich Security Conference where he said that there must be also, he didn't use the poetic language of a common home, but he was talking about a cooperative security architecture. I mean, let's not forget that even before Putin, and Putin himself had said, if you are proposing NATO instead of the OSCE, so we'll join NATO. I mean, this was actually said. But no, of course not. We're not going to let you join NATO, which then again projects the NATO as an operation that is a threat to the Russian Federation. So it's very sad because things could have been different. Things could have been done in a way to avoid the present tragedy. And I remember one of the last meetings I participated in, and at the Foreign Affairs Council in Brussels. And hearing minister after minister and the EU officials saying, still not taking Russia seriously, still believing that Russia was going to collapse because of the economic sanctions, and that even their military was committing a lot of strategic errors, and they were very weak, and they had retreated from Kiev. All this was interpreted as a sign of weakness. And let us now decide things on the battlefield. I remember, and this is not in the Council of the Security Ministers. This is the Council of Foreign Affairs, where, as diplomats, we should be resorting to diplomacy and talking. And one thing, Pascal, which was really striking, let's not talk to the Russians. Not even talk to the Russians. Not talk, not agree, not even talk.
I just need to ask. I just need to ask again. Like, you were foreign minister until June, July
2022.
Yeah,
Yes,
until June, July 2022, right?
The military operation had started till March, actually, Pascal. in March. So it was a month.
Were in a meeting among foreign ministers of the EU where people actually said, let's fight it out. We have to push the Russians to fight.
Yes.
Let's fight it out.
Yes, yes. And I will always remember, Pascal, that towards the end, we're talking now January 2022 and February 2022. It started becoming impossible to distinguish between a Council of Ministers of NATO and a Council of Ministers of the EU. Not only because Blinken was coming regularly, but also trust, so.
Can you quickly explain the two structures? Because not everybody knows what these councils are. Can you just explain them?
Yes, obviously when we're talking about the North Atlantic Treaty Organizations, which has its own Council of Ministers, that is open only to the members of the NATO alliance, and there are some observers which they like to string along, but that is, under the US command, but that is separate, although it is in Brussels, which is interesting that this is also in Brussels as neighbors, But then there is the Council of Ministers of the European Union, which obviously is attended only by the 27 member states. Amongst them, at that time, there were still a number of neutral countries. Where Finland, Sweden was still neutral, Austria, Malta, and Ireland.
Yeah, and
this was run. Sorry, Pascal. It was run like a NATO council. There was no distinction. Or listen, let's apart from the fact that ministers and then are intertwined with the structure, because you end up from being the prime minister of the Netherlands, you go to the general secretary of NATO. So it's incestuous. Totally, it has become totally incestuous.
Yeah, but this is really, really something important that a lot of people are not aware, right? So the Council of also Foreign Ministers, right, means like the foreign ministers of NATO countries, one day they meet in the headquarters in Brussels of NATO, and then the next day the same group of people plus you plus a few other neutrals then meet again on the premises of the EU, and obviously they carry the same discussions forward, right?
Yes,
and obviously NATO then influences the discussion inside the EU.
Yes, and what is interesting, that is done in a very concrete manner. The NATO ministers meet informally for a breakfast, and after the breakfast, they come to the Foreign Affairs Council. Because I remember talking to colleagues, you gain the trust of people, I will not mention his name, of a member state, a very powerful member state in NATO, actually, and one with the strongest army, I think now, apart from Russia, in NATO. And for example, telling me, we discussed that the French minister has told us that they're moving out of Mali. And I said, oh, that is very, very wise. And he looked at me shocked. I said, as usual, we're allowing Africa, we're abandoning Africa, and then we are surprised that other great and medium powers fill that space. So they used to have a meeting there, coordinate their position. Then obviously they would be, let me see, I think 22 out of 27 members were in NATO, and there was no doubt how the EU, as intended in American diplomacy and in American foreign policy, the EU plays second fiddle to NATO and seen as a policy tool of NATO. And although we are supporting the European Union, but it must only grow to a certain level. And I remember talking to American diplomats, and they are making fun of the concept of strategic autonomy, because we were discussing documents of how Europe is going to grow into being an autonomous player, a geopolitical player, and we must, decrease our dependence. But then they used to make fun of it, and they said, come on, we don't take them seriously. So I think this is the tragedy of the European Union. It's also the tragedy of the Organization for the Security of and Cooperation in Europe, because now it's there, but it's I don't know. It's in a coma. It's in a very serious. And it is such a pity because that was the tool. That was the tool to really consider each other's concerns. But from the early 90s, you can tell we are now dealing with a weak Russia. Let's not take them seriously because however much they yell and however much they scream and however much they tell us in our bilateral meetings, do not come closer. Let's have another security cooperation instead of this kind of encroachment coming towards us. They were not taking them seriously.
This is the big tragedy, because we had the OSCE, and that would have been the way for a common home, but we threw it away knowingly. But I still need to ask you again about this connection then. I mean, because in NATO you don't only have the European foreign ministers and prime ministers and so on, you also have the American and the Canadians, right? Are there ever moments when you realize that there's friction, and the Americans, especially the Americans, the American Secretary of State, or even the president, is pushing for things that the Europeans don't want, but through this pipeline, through this NATO and then EU pipeline, they get their way anyhow?
Yes, but unfortunately, and I don't want to be misunderstood. And even if you see some works of think tanks of Europe, and in terms of them not being people against the European Union or skeptical of the European Union, so we're not talking about what they are now referring to as the far right or the sovereignists, but actually think tanks who say that the European Union has allowed itself to become a vassal of the European Union has allowed itself to become a vassal of the United States. This is not good for the United States, and it is not good for the European Union. And then the concretization of what we're saying was with the so-called deal reached in Scotland between, and it's not a deal, it's imposed deal between President Trump and Ursula von der Leyen, where she took on commitments that is not within her mansion to take, and said, the European Union is going to buy the weapons from you. So what strategic autonomy? We're going to invest in the United States, and we are going to allow your products to come in without any paying any tariffs. But in our case, what we export to you will still have tariffs. I mean, that concretizes the superior inferior structure and the how powerless the European Union has become. So in these council meetings, what was decided in the NATO headquarters was then also carried out in the Council of Ministers of the European Union. And I can tell you, whenever Anthony Blinken came to the council, whatever he said went. There wasn't any serious discussion, like there wasn't any serious discussion when we were discussing sanctions. And from what I can tell, the decisions that are made, there is a kind of a silo approach. There is no integration between the economic policy of the EU, the security policy of the EU, and the diplomatic policy of the EU. Decisions are taken also apart from each other, So from what I could tell, and even from the papers presented in council meetings, there wasn't the question of, but are these sanctions going to work? Is the world made up only of the US, EU, and the Russian Federation? If you're going to push the Russian Federation away from you, are they going to just lie down and die, or will they seek new arrangements and new relationships? And I remember discussing, even with my friend, because I would still consider him my friend, Josep Borrell, and telling him, what we're doing now is obviously also pushing the Russian Federation into the embrace of China. Oh, no, that's not going to happen because the Russians do not trust the Chinese. And that, the Chinese...
Borrell dismissed it. He dismissed it. He said, no, this cannot happen.
Yes, and the Chinese are encroaching in Siberia, so the Russians feel threatened. So no. So there was this. There must have been a discussion at the top leadership, where the equation was yes, let's punish Russia, and Russia will collapse because it will have no friends, it will be isolated, they won't be able to do anything, they won't be able to sell anything. They will stay away from China, they will stay away from India, they will stay away from 84% of the world, you know. But it's incredible. I can't believe the kind of, not even I would say short-sightedness, the strategic blindness, not strategic autonomy, the blindness of taking decisions like this without saying, listen, if we take this decision, what are the consequences going to be? What is the bigger scenario? No consideration for that. It's incredible how such important decisions that affect the lives of millions of people are taken so superficially.
Can you explain to yourself, because obviously you didn't share that assessment and you didn't share that mindset, but can you explain to you why it is that the majority of the EU leadership and NATO leadership that actually, grew up and came of age, of political age, during this movement of the OSCE, right? During the 70s and 80s and 90s, during the time when actually the people were building and working on de-escalation and getting the Cold War to stop, right? And we know that. I mean, Jack Matlock and so on, they keep telling us they were working on ending the Cold War together. And these people that you're talking about, they were young during that period, and then came of political age then and thereafter. Why is it that they don't have that normative framework that you and I have, and they obviously lack it? Can you explain it to yourself?
Yes, I think the age factor is important, Pascal. The age factor is important. I mean, we are talking about the Second World War of 80 years ago, where at least 85 million people were killed, and then another 25 million with war-related causes. These generations do not know the war as the leaders that started building the European Union, and I believe authentically said that the answer is not war anymore on the continent of Europe, but sitting together, coming together, discussing our differences, and building a cooperative not only a cooperative security architecture, but also then strengthened and underpinned economically, politically, and culturally. And all these leaders had working relationship with the Soviet Union because they knew what it meant to go to war. It is incredible, and it is so sad to see young ministers talking so glibly about war. Obviously, they are not going to go to any war themselves. They probably have not seen people dying and people butchered on the battlefield. And talking about war, not only as the last resort, when diplomacy has failed, it's as if now we understand diplomacy to pick up the bits after the world has been shattered, instead of trying to prevent the world from shattering.
Yeah.
Uh, it's, it's, it's
Yeah.
incredible. I remember, Pascal, because these are moments which I remember being in Spain, and I was having a discussion with one of their diplomacy academies. And because I am really influenced by the Cuban Missile Crisis and how that crisis was resolved, and I see it as a paradigm
Mm.
for diplomacy and how we need to work, how we need to save, you know, ourselves from ourselves. Uh, then having a number of Spanish diplomats coming over to me and said, you have revived the appetite for diplomacy in us again. I said, "My God, I thought I was coming here as an inexperienced foreign minister, hearing what veteran Spanish diplomats have to say, and they do have good diplomats, and they have had very good diplomats. So it is sad because there was no doubt that diplomacy was not given a chance to work in the last since at least 1990. You know,
The
so sad.
I mean, the Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's the malaise we have. But what I wonder is, we managed to build the OSCE, and okay, the OSCE was never perfect. The CSCE was a very long and drawn out process, but it rendered a result. It took 5 years, but it rendered a result, and it rendered that result during the Cold War, during the bipolarity.
Pascal, remember that it was a very slow process. It had to be a slow process because it was, considering series, the difficulties that there were. We're not talking about, getting our violins out and playing together and singing together. There are real differences to confront. But remember that even from the Soviet Union, you had somebody like Andrei Gromyko who used to say, better 1,000 years of negotiation than 1 day of war. I mean, that is a very profound reflection. But that mentality is not anymore in the generations that came after.
But we managed to have that during the Cold War. And I know you, in our last discussion, you said Kissinger actually told the Americans, "Don't worry about it. We don't really mean it." Okay, but we did have the signatures, and then we go into the post Cold War. We go into the unipolar moment, and we go into the end of that, and we are now already beyond it. We're already in a multipolar world. But now in this multipolar world, we see the absolute amok, how the United States is running amok, and it's just like basically trying to destroy every norm we have in diplomacy, including, of course, shooting at civilians, ships, and preparing a war with Venezuela and bombing nuclear installations in Iran. I mean, every norm we believe to have, including also not shooting at or trying to destroy the nuclear capabilities of the Russians or long range strikes in Russia. Every norm there was shattered, but we're already beyond the unipolar moment. Can you there's a mismatch in the timeline here, or what the actions are compared to where we are on the timeline.
Well, we have to see now how we're going to achieve some kind of equilibrium, however fragile it is. I remember the interview that Richard Nixon had given way back in 1971 to the editors of the time, telling them that the time of peace is when you have the balance of great powers, when you have not only the United States, but you have the Soviet Union, obviously, at that time, and you have India, and you have China, and you have other powers coming up, and they find a balance among themselves. That is not what has happened, and I think we need to remember that probably the generation that we have been talking about, and you have asked me, but what didn't they understand? That it's better to build a kind of balance and to have some kind of cooperative security. They behaved very much like what happened in Versailles. No, the important thing was to humiliate and punish Germany.
Right.
The famous Estonian diplomat Mullerson says, where was the wisdom of the concert of Europe? They took care even of the interests of the defeated powers. So now we're at this stage, as you say. It reminds me a bit of that Afghanistan game, no, with no rules. I think it's called Bushkashi, where you have two teams against each other, playing with a headless goat and trying to get it on each side, and there are no rules. It's a war of all against all. And we are at that stage where everything is being, as you said, and it also reminds me of the fairy tale of Hans Christian Andersen of the Emperor with no clothes. Those who are ready to speak truth to power, and it's not the first time they said, the emperor has no clothes, although it tries to wear the clothes of human rights, democracy, things like that. But now it's the emperor himself says, no, I am naked. I want to use my naked power, as you said. So there isn't even the pretense of trying to cover it up, except using a bit this excuse of drugs.
Now, what does that do, though? And let's shift to Venezuela. Let's shift to this military buildup and to the obvious threat, which is already a breach of the UN Charter, right? You're not allowed to threaten force. You're not allowed to use it, and you're not allowed to threaten it. And they're obviously threatening, and the emperor is as naked as he can be without starting to peel off his own skin. But what does this do? My guess is like, the global south has seen through this game for a long time because they also suffered from colonialism and ongoing colonialism still, right? But isn't there going to be this moment when even the Europeans, even your former colleagues, will have to say like, okay, fine, I think this is a transgression. Doesn't that moment need to come?
Well, it will come, and I think it's coming. But again, are they ready to face the truth? I think we are coming to a reality check, both in how the war in Ukraine is coming to an end, and what is happening in Venezuela, and also what happened in Gaza. No, when every norm you can imagine, every human norm you can imagine was broken, and there wasn't the outrage you would have expected from a community of nations in the European Union, talking so much about the rule of law and about human rights and about democracy and decency. Um, uh, are they willing to understand that what is happening does not depend only on the personality of Trump? Because I see that we are quite a number of us, I think, are indulging in this kind of superficial analysis. That once Trump goes away in 3 years' time, harmony and the rule of law and no, there are younger people within within America who will take over. I mean, it's enough to see how Marco Rubio behaves and Brexit. Although there are voices, we must say this, there are voices like Tulsi Gabbard saying the time for regime change has changed. It's different now. But at the same time, then you have Trump coming to Japan and saying, now we will smash the hell out of our enemies. So how are we going to manage this very difficult and turbulent period? If we do not manage it well, somehow or other find this kind of fragile equilibrium and we allow things to escalate, that is very serious. That can be very, very, very dangerous. Because now we are at a crossroads, no? Where even those who want to continue dominating, quite a number of those who were dominated and who didn't want to be dominated, but were not in a position to push back, now they are in a position to push back. So how is that going to be resolved? In history teaches us that in these moments, quite a number of wars break out, and in fact, quite a number of wars have broken out. But it's the first time in human history where we can annihilate each other. So uh, let's hope that the restraint comes, at least in terms of self-preservation. I am very sort of struck by, and I use it as an image to try and explain what I feel. That few years ago, I saw the sculptures of Michael Schutt, the German sculptor, and he has a series of sculptures called United Enemies. So you have these two ugly men hating each other, but they are bound by the same rope and they are standing on stilts. The only way they can remain together, standing upright and not falling and collapsing, is to find ways of being together, even if they hate each other. So I think it's a good metaphor of the human condition, and we need coexistence. Now, ideally, it should be peaceful coexistence, but at least let us have coexistence. That we must find ways of living together, and taking each other seriously, respecting each others, and respecting each other's concerns. If you do something, even if it's not your intention to do that, because I also heard in the council talk like, but why should Russia feel threatened by NATO? It's not our intention to invade Russia, although Russia has been invaded quite a number of times from the
By Europe?
Europe.
By Europe?
And we must not remember Napoleon, and we must not remember, well, must forget Napoleon and Hitler, but we must take each other seriously, to find a way of living together and at a time when there are so many global challenges that can only be faced together, whether it is climate change, whether it is the mobility of people, AI, pandemics, development, how we are, how we are still a world where millions live on €2 a day. There are quite a lot of things that need to be done.
I mean, all of this makes perfect sense, but that's because I think you're a sane person who actually,
But I
like
think
a lot of
people,
people has sane uh, goals and aspirations for humanity.
but Pascal, my hope is not in the leaders. My hope is in the citizens who want to live a normal life.
Yes,
And even in Europe, they have started pushing back.
yes,
Because if you see your government taking money away from your social services,
yeah.
from public services, to put them into war or to send them to a war theater, uh, that's creating a problem. In a
Absolutely.
here, definitely
But my
people
question
are.
my question is, like, should we look for the the primary issue of the sickness we are going through? Should we look for that in the psychology of the people in power, or should we look for it within the way the system works? I mean, you gave us a
Yes.
beautiful example of how, the way that the NATO and EU structures are set up create this leeway and this pathway of power from one into the other. And that's a structural issue, not a psychological issue. Where do you think we should look for the problem?
No, it's in the structure. It's in the structure, obviously reinforced by the psychology and vice versa. Because if you still have a world where the main institutions, I mean, to talk about the United Nations, even just a few days ago, the United States has suspended its money, its funding to the United Nations. So you can imagine what that means. They have also dictated to the United Nations to cut peacekeeping forces. So we're not talking about, bureaucracy and about money that is not spent well. I'm sure that there is an exercise to be done about that. But to actually say, cut 25% of the money that goes to peacekeeping forces, that is also very sad. But then you look at the structure of the Security Council. Does it reflect today's world? Look at the IMF. Does it reflect today's world? And the World Bank. When you push people away, what happens? You get the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and you get BRICS, and you get a number of other regional arrangements where they say we will bypass these institutions that are not working for us. And if you're not going to change them, we will set up organizations, not necessarily to be against you, but for us to manage our affairs. And this is what is happening, and that is healthy. That is healthy, And if the 14% of the world, which is the West, is not going to change and allow within it on an equal footing, like are they going to decolonize their approach and their psychology? That if you have been so dominant for so many years, you have to learn how to have equal partners.
Yeah, but this is what's necessary, the decolonization of the of the Western mindset, because they're still living in the 19th century idea of Mr. Borrell's garden, right? They still live in it. They can't even see
Yes,
it. Um,
yes, 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 yes.
so okay.
Yes.
Um, Thank you very much for these insights. Do you think that there's something else we need to consider to understand, like this current very, like, belligerent approach of the West in general, or did we cover it?
Well, I only hope that what's going to happen in Venezuela will not have very serious consequences if it escalates. Because we refer to the Cuban Missile Crisis. That
Yeah.
crisis was averted because both sides spoke to each other. They were very distrustful of each other, but their back channel communications saved the day because they took serious concerns of each other. Because sometimes we make the mistake of looking at the Cuban Missile Crisis from when the point that the United States discovered that the Soviet Union was building a base in Cuba. No, the story goes a bit earlier when the United States was putting Jupiter missiles in Turkey. So how was it solved? By taking away the missiles or the installations from Cuba and taking away the Jupiter missile crisis. Instead of us talking today how we're going to amass missiles against each other on each other's frontier. So I only hope that the West is coming to its limits, that the hubris will hit a brick wall, and it is hitting a brick wall. And unfortunately, it seems that that is the only way to learn, that they would have liked to impose themselves totally on the world, but now the world has changed. And you see great powers re-emerging again. You know, you have obviously China and then Russia. But then you have also a number of what we can refer to as middle powers, like Turkey, like Saudi Arabia, like Brazil, like India, who are also not willing to be bullied and to be told, listen, side with us against the others. All these are seeking to, you know, to align themselves not with one block. I like the concept of Jai Shankar, who says it's not a matter of talking about non-alignment. Uh, I'd like us to talk of multi-alignment. You know, you have relations with as many different countries as possible. I think that is the only way that this world will now emerge. But it's a good sign that those who were dominated are now in a position to say we do not want to be dominated anymore. How is that going to work out? Let's hope that there is a way, and I don't think it will be painless, but that there is a way that we are still, you know, living at the end of that experience, and our planet does not become an empty planet orbiting in the universe like other empty planets.
I very much share that hope of yours. Evarist, people who want to read more from you, they can find your writings in the Times of Malta, where you regularly
Yeah.
publish. Is there another place where people should go?
And there's a website as well. There's
Okay.
a website, and they can find it. Just Google my name, and it will come up.
I'll also put the link into the description of this video below. Evarist Bartolo, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much. Thank you.